Following the events of CoreTCG's in-person regional in Los Angeles, California, Risu and I had the opportunity to commentate the later half of the event on stream. If you'd like to check out the replay of these rounds, you can find them at Eggman's YouTube channel, link in the description. With definitive results, this is the second event after PPG in which we can get an idea of how the meta will look. Because outside of store regionals, Carta Magica has an event on October 18th, and Versus Games has the last possible US opportunity on December 7th. And because of this, October 18th will be the last time this data is viable, because a week after this date, BT23 Hacker Slumber officially drops. The narrative of today's video is going to once again look at the overall distribution of decks for this event. Although the top 16 lists were released, it's also important to observe the overall playing field. 365 players competed in this event, and today's video looks at the top 64, top 32, and top 16 as well. As always, if you enjoy this type of content, do consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and hitting that notification bell for more future content. Of the 365 players, after cataloging all the deck profiles again, this produced 62 unique deck categories. And as you can see in this chart, I narrowed down these 62 categories into 15 generic categories, with the remaining decks being lumped into miscellaneous ones. The reasoning for this being that the decks only account for 2% or more than what was seen. And while you can see that the overall categories were narrowed down significantly, interestingly, if we start at the top 64 players, you would see 25 unique decks. One thing to note immediately is that Lucemon, Magnamon X, Sakuyamon, Ulforce Veedramon, Beelzemon, Hunters, Bagra Army, Galacticmon, and Malaloop did make it into top 64. But past this point, none of these decks would convert into top 32. Not saying that these decks aren't competitively viable, or performing as well as people would like, but more so again indicating that matchups can be crucial as how well your deck does. For example, out of the 365 players at this event, only 6 players played DM-V2 machinedramon, with 1 converting into top 64, top 32, and top 16 respectively. That player would end up taking first place at this event. In this case, DM-V2 machinedramon's overall conversion rate into the top 16 was 16.7%, looking at the other 5 players who didn't make it. However, Red Purple Imperial Dramon on the other hand had almost twice the representation, but had only 1 make it into the top 16, and 2 each in top 32 and top 64. A conversion rate of overall 9%. Is the argument here that Red Purple Imperial Dramon is a bad deck? Hardly. This type of analysis typically has a deeper understanding in overall deck construction, and in Japan's best of 1 can be rewarding when you high roll. As you can see based on this data, Rocks had a whopping 23 people enter this event, with an overall representation of the 365 players being 6.3%. And out of those 23 players, 5 of those players would make it into the top 64, with 4 of these players making the top 32 and 16 respectively. This implied that Rocks had a 25% representation in the top 16, and an overall conversion rate of 17%. Revealing all the data now, you can see that overall Gil Toolbox had the highest conversion rate because this was the only deck that I placed in this category. And while true, you could argue Gallantmon and Gilbirds has the same toolbox bottom end, the top end for this particular deck profile was Leviamon and Minervamon. And again, if you want to check out these top 16 lists, you can find them at Eggman Events page for not just the event's deck list, but those in the history of the card game as well. And if you want to hear more of a discussion on these top 16 lists, head over to Risu the Squirrel's channel, also link in the description. Gil Toolbox has its own category, because it's not your traditional list that takes you up to Gallantmon X, nor is it something that is explosive in play like Gil Birds. Its unique build like this can also throw players for a loop because of their unfamiliarity to these cards. Reasons why DM-V2 Machinedramon got extremely popular because of a multitude of players, myself included, discounting cards from EX9. But what can players take away from today's video? It's just a bunch of numbers with not many pictures or diagrams. The big takeaway is that this kind of data can help players identify what other players are trending towards, and ultimately, which of these decks can actually do well. Remember with information that players are still playing Gallantmon OTK, CS Omnimon, Beelzemon, Gallantmon Midrange, Blue-Green Imperial Dramon, and Galaxy, you can use this information to determine whether these decks are still performing well. Despite Omnimon having almost 6.6% of the representation, only 1 would convert it into the top 16. But Beelzemon, Midrange Gallantmon, and Blue-Green Imperial Dramon do not see that conversion to the top 16. And while I want to stress that making top 32 and top 64 is an accomplishment you should most definitely be proud of, the top 16 players are the only players who will get their invite to the next major event that sets the stage for Worlds. Which means, in my opinion for this final segment of the video, what is my recommendation to take to the next big event? While there aren't any big events this up and coming weekend, there is another regional event on the 18th, and of course there are store regionals as well. But based on the limited data from PPG and CoreTCG's event, DM-V2 machinedramon still seems to be tripping people up, and new favorites like Rocks, Turtle Gankumon, and Gallantmon OTK still seem to be performing well. But if you really want to mess with your opponent, check out an up-and-coming deck profile that's coming to the channel. It's quite trashy. This is DIGI-PANDA, logging out.